You want to book as much acting work as you can, as often as you can. We get that. The thing is, you don't book acting work by focusing on booking acting work. The industry is more dynamic than that, and the art is more interesting than that.
By taking you inside the craft, the casting room, and the business, and bringing other industry experts into the conversation, we dig in. We pull back the curtain of the industry and show you how much power you really have as an artist. Here's the truth. When you bring your humanity to the work and the industry, you become an artistic leader, the kind of actor who books work.
Even after decades of working with actors all over the world, in our classes at the BGB studio, teaching, coaching, casting, directing, producing, acting, on set, on stage, behind the camera, and in front, nothing excites us more than seeing you express your unique artistic voice, humanize the business, and book work doing it.
We're here on the podcast in our online classes at the BGB studio to give you all the tools you need to be a championship-level working actor right now in an industry that desperately needs your voice and your leadership.
Yeah, industry and artistry. This is the only place you're going to hear this.
I'm Risa.
And I'm Steve, and this is the Acting Podcast from the BGB studio.
We are thrilled and moved by the response to the podcast. We love reaching actors all over the world, actors like you, who tell us that our podcast inspires them, informs them, and makes them excited and proud to be an actor.
Yeah, but make no mistake, an acting career is won by being in the consistent practice of the work, week after week, month after month, year after year. Success for an actor is in the doing.
So, here at the BGB studio, we offer the highest quality acting training for passionate, committed, talented, and ambitious actors. We see that kind of work transform talent into successful careers, and that makes us so happy.
There is no substitute for doing the work consistently, and we offer the work of success. We are the home of your 10,000 hours. We offer ongoing and 8-week on-camera auditions, scene study, and workout classes. They're available now.
So sign up now to secure your spot and get to work. Go to BraymanGarciaBraun.com/classes or click the link for classes in the podcast show notes. We'll see you in class. Welcome, everybody, to Season 2 of the Acting Podcast. This episode was recorded earlier in the year, pre-COVID, and we're excited to finally share it with you. We find the conversation in this episode to be relevant, vital, and inspiring, now, in fact, more than ever. Keep listening and enjoy. Mia Schachter was born and raised in Los Angeles and returned in 2018 after working in theater in New York City for nearly 10 years. Her background in theater, dance, casting, gender studies, and neuroscience informs all of her work. Her educational background includes a BA in philosophy from Columbia with an emphasis on ethics and identity. As an intimacy coordinator, Mia is among a new wave of actor advocates in the realm of intimacy, sexual content, nudity, and more. A pioneer in a landscape of film and television that up until very recently functioned without the help of what is clearly a vital part of production and filmmaking. Working for networks like HBO, Netflix, and Freeform, among others, Mia's job is to attune to the needs of actors and directors with scenes that include simulated sex, nudity, and sexual content in order to make sure that everyone is emotionally and mentally safe on set, while helping showrunners and directors achieve their creative vision. She works with actors, directors, writers, producers, legal teams at studios and networks, costume and makeup designers, and production crews, negotiating everything from sex simulation choreography to nudity writers, to providing emotional support to actors in intimate situations. Just like a stunt coordinator, she helps make scenes look real and stay safe. We have also been fortunate in having Mia share her work surrounding intimacy and consent in our classes here at the BGB studio, and we're thrilled to now share her with you and the rest of the world. We welcome Mia Schachter to the Acting Podcast. Hi, Mia.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So let's just dive in, because I think people will want to know this. Certainly we wanted to know, what is an intimacy coordinator?
80% of showrunners want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they don't. Go ahead.
Right. So very simply, an intimacy coordinator, just like a stunt coordinator, is there to make sex scenes look real and stay safe. In my realm, that's usually emotionally safe and less physically safe, though that does come into play sometimes, and sometimes we also bring in a stunt coordinator.
And when would that be? What is the intersection?
Like an assault scene, rough sex, a BDSM scene, something like that. So what I do is I mediate the power dynamic between a production and the actors. So whether that's like producers, writers, the director, I'm there to kind of buffer. I'm a liaison between the actors and the production, and I help the director achieve their creative vision while staying within the boundaries that the actor has. So often there's a bit of negotiation in there. I try to stay out of the creative side of things, though sometimes that does come up if we have to kind of make slight alterations to accommodate. I also can act as an LGBTQIA+ ally on set. If there are actors that fall into that umbrella, or if there's content around those topics. Let's see, what else? I'm an advocate for actors first and foremost, and often that means making sure, like, for example, if an actor doesn't eat before a sex scene, I can tell the assistant director that, and they will try to schedule the sex scene earlier in the day so that this person isn't hanging out until, 5, 6, 7, 8 at night, not eating. So sometimes it's just things like that. Sometimes it's things like this person, has a specific modesty garment request, and then I'm talking a costume. So it really varies. I'm a coordinator in a true sense, so I work across many departments: legal, casting, the production, also costumes, makeup, props sometimes, and then even into post. Because sometimes what happens is that our nudity or simulated sex riders are very strictly legal, and there will be further agreements that I've made with actors, such as cellulite as an example. Like, we have to, this actor requested that we visually remove their cellulite. So that's something that I'll communicate to the post team.
And that will come up on set.
It'll come up usually when I'm talking to an actor right from the beginning. Or, I really don't like what my tummy looks like from this angle. And there'll be things like, that's not going to go in a rider because it's not a legal issue. And we are going to catch some of that because if the camera's moving or you're moving or whatever, we're going to catch it. But then I will communicate with the script supervisor, and then I'll communicate that further to post to make sure that things like, because they'll get the riders, they'll get that legal language, but the agreements that I've made with the actors are sometimes beyond the scope of that.
Yeah.
So it's all the way through, like prep into post.
And that is so much. Like, so many of those things can be dissected. I can't imagine how malleable and flexible you have to be to show up on set with a certain idea, be it a legal one or a conversation with an actor or an actor's agent or whatever else. And then you get on set in real time and they're losing light and we got to do this thing right now. And all of a sudden things are unfolding and you have to be so present and still advocate and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and it's also, my job is a bit mysterious, as is like our emotional lives. It's not always visible, and so there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding, at least for now, about what I'm actually doing aside from standing around.
And so people, producers, directors, actors don't really know what that is. So what is the reaction that you get, and some of the resistance that might come up around that because people don't know what you do or how you can help.
But I suspect also, though, that certain people don't know what you do. Other people, like for instance, actors who have had so many circumstances under which they have felt unsafe, totally get it, like on a cellular level, and are thankful that you're there.
Yes, but they still don't always know everything that I do, and a lot of it is invisible. Like, I might be looking at a monitor and just thinking, like, knowing what I know about this actor, they're not going to like this angle of their face, for example. I'm not going to tell the actor that. I'm going to point it out to the script supervisor and the director might say, okay, let's move the camera a little bit, or let's have her sit up a little bit, or something like that. So a lot of it really does fly under the radar. And a lot of it also is somewhat intuitive. Like, it's not always so cut and dry or even like fact-based. It's kind of gut-based.
when you say I think that actor might not like that angle, how would you know that? What would be the process to get to that information?
Just knowing what I know about a certain actor and what they've told me about certain angles. Like, they might say, I don't want to show my stomach from straight on because I have tummy rolls when I sit in this position. Okay, but they're not thinking, what about like a 45-degree angle or like a 30-degree angle? So knowing that they don't want a full, like, dead on front angle, I can kind of extrapolate from that. Or something like cellulite. If they're worried about cellulite in their thighs, but then we see cellulite in their butt, for example.
It's the same issue.
It's the same issue.
Right.
They just haven't explicitly said it.
So you're a director, somebody is a director sitting there trying to make their day, trying to get the scene shot, and then now you're talking to them about cellulite and tummy angles.
Yeah.
And so what is that? How does that go down?
So I have to kind of pick and choose. Like, there might be an instance where I see cellulite, and so I tell the script supervisor, make a note that VFX can digitally remove the cellulite, instead of saying to the director, let's move the camera. Whereas if a director is really open to it, it's also going to depend on, like, a day player versus a guest star versus a series regular. So say we have a series regular and the director wants to shoot from a certain angle, I could say to the director, hey, I know that so-and-so doesn't like their tummy from this angle, for example. And just depending on the director, depending on the role, they're going to be more or less open to accommodating, and that'll just determine who I talk to about it.
Sure, that makes sense.
And so how do you get hired? And as much as you just said, one of the things you said was your job is partly to mitigate the power dynamics. Mm-hmm. How does someone in power both recognize that they need this power dynamic to be mitigated,
right,
and then say, hey, I need help mitigating my power dynamic relative to this actor? What's in it for them, and what do they think they're getting outside of just like, let's be on the right side of Me Too or whatever that is?
Yeah. So it depends on the network and the project. At HBO, it's required to have an intimacy coordinator anytime there's a rider involved, which almost always correlates to any time there's a closed set. Yesterday, I did a shoot where we had a closed set but no rider, and it was just because it was sort of sensitive, intimate content but not technically sex. So HBO hires intimacy coordinators for any show that's going to have that content from day one. It was mandated that they would be doing this last summer after it went so well on The Deuce with Alicia Rodas. So at other networks, I'm often brought in because there's an issue or kind of like a fire that needs to be put out, or a problematic person, or they're just sort of starting to think this is becoming standard, we should start doing this, and then it either comes from an actor, a director, or a producer. I'm not privy to exactly that thought process, but I can give you specific examples. I know that I was brought on to a show because a freeform show, which is Disney, and so there was no sex, there was no nudity, but they were playing teenagers. There was something of a trauma that occurred, and so the actress asked for an intimacy coordinator. They were faking nudity, it was implied, so she was wearing a bandeau and then had a sheet on over it, but she had never done anything like this in her career.
Was she a kid? Was she how?
She was not a minor, but she was playing a minor.
But a young actor.
A young actress,
Yeah.
and had never done a sex scene before, or nudity, or anything in that arena. And so she specifically requested an intimacy coordinator. I've had directors request intimacy coordinators, or request me, not me specifically, but me. And I've had producers also. And I think it generally comes from, producers want to protect themselves. Directors want to make sure that they're not, a lot of times directors want to make sure that they're not pushing people by accident. I think that's happening a lot.
So being super careful.
Yeah.
What does that mean, pushing them by accident?
Well, I mean, if you're a director and you want an actor to do a certain thing, no matter how kind and deferential you are, it's really hard to say no to a director. It's just really hard to look a director in the eye and say, I'm not really comfortable with that. Especially if you are a new actor, or not a series regular. And I think there are a lot of directors who are sensitive to that, but also know that their specialty is not making people comfortable. That's not their forte.
Right.
And so they just kind of want to make sure that no one feels pressured into doing what they want. Or kind of the other side of it, I guess, is that they want, these scenes are hard to do. They're very vulnerable. And so they want to just do anything and everything that they can to make sure that the people involved are comfortable.
Right.
And are people threatened by you, though? And suddenly you're there now helping direct, in some ways, the sexual choreography and intimacy of a scene that is really under their umbrella.
Right. So I'm always braced for there to be some resistance. It just depends on who it's from. I have yet to be on a set where there was none whatsoever. Whether it's an actor, a producer, a director, a writer. I've been told that that people are feeling policed by my position, like not even by me personally,
Sure.
but just that they feel like having me there feels like a reprimand. I think that that's a specific thing that would happen on a show that it has been in production for a number of years. They've been doing fine, and they feel like they haven't had any incidents. And so now they feel like there's kind of an HR watchdog being sent to keep tabs on them, that I might be an inspector or, really like taking notes on like things that go wrong. And that's just very much not my job.
But you can understand how they might think that because they don't know what your job is.
Completely.
Yeah.
And what I'm learning is to kind of, I'm learning sort of the subtle indications, like earlier and earlier in meeting somebody, that can indicate to me what they think my job is, because that way I can sort of combat the misunderstandings more specifically. Because what I've found is that no matter how many times I explain my job or how in-depth I do it, if someone has a particular set of fears about what it is that I do, or preconceived notions about what I do, or insecurities about how they've been operating, that all gets projected onto me. Mm-hmm. But on this show where I was told that I was seen as the sex police, they completely have 180'd, and I'm now like close with the production team, and we work closely together. They know kind of how to talk to me and how to ask questions, and we problem solve things together. And I think they now, I'm pretty confident that they now see me as a real asset on the set.
How did that turn around?
Well, finally a producer actually, like, I was just getting this sense, and I was getting also feedback from various places that this wasn't really working, but I couldn't really get a clear sense of why or what they thought I was there to do. And then finally, one of the producers said very plainly to me, "We feel like we're being policed." And in that moment, I felt so much empathy for them. That's a horrible feeling. That's a horrible feeling. And I don't want to be making people feel that way, but I also in that moment realized this kind of has nothing to do with me. Like, I don't personally give off that vibe. I don't think I come into a space and tell people what to do.
You're not threatening, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No.
But I also realized that meant that they felt like I just understood what they thought I had been sent there to do. And from that moment on, I made the decision to stop trying to tell what my job is and rather show it and let them see. And they really have completely kind of turned around, and now I feel much more part of the team. So,
and you can be more effective.
Completely.
Yeah.
I really admire what you're doing. It feels like you're a pioneer in a lot of ways. I don't mean just the work itself, which is great, but like, because you're walking into all these situations in which, sure, maybe in particular men of a certain personality type, one might say, these are broad strokes, right? Who are the showrunners, directors, or whatever, who've had careers for a long time, during which they were always centered and directing other people and telling people what to do, et cetera. And you walk into that situation, they don't know what you do. They feel like this is some ripple effect from the Me Too movement and the overcorrection, or like whatever the narrative is. And I suspect you have to do a lot of heavy lifting to win hearts and minds. Probably work that you shouldn't have to be doing, but you're doing it for them. Is that exhausting?
Is that exhausting? It hasn't been exhausting yet.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. There have been a lot of growing pains. I would put it that way. I think I get very excited about the idea that I am a pioneer in this field. There are 7 of us in Los Angeles right now, and there's I think 7 or 8 in New York, and then 1 in Atlanta and 1 in Chicago. So this is like we are at the frontier, at the crest of the wave, and that is really exciting to me. But on the other hand, I feel like I'm often dealing with the growing pains for the sake of all future intimacy coordinators for the rest of time.
Right.
Because it's so new, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, just speak a little bit to that. How short a time you've been doing it, how you got there, and how all of you got there.
Yeah.
You know, to this place where now there's 7, and when maybe 2 years ago there were none.
There were none.
Yeah, and so that's a really fascinating journey to this thing that is now becoming, hopefully, somewhat of a standard.
Yeah, and I can also maybe actually the way that I got into this might help sort of illustrate that.
Yeah.
So in early 2018, some of the actresses on The Deuce went to a producer and said, "We need a buffer. Like this isn't working. We can't look our director in the eye and tell him." We can't actually feel what we're comfortable with, I think, is how it sort of came about. Because you're mediating so many different conflicting interests in your head. Like, you want to give a director what they want. You want to be seen as an actor who's willing to do whatever. And
you've agreed to it. You're on the show. You've read the script. So
you've been hired. It's a job.
Also, you spent 15, 20 years trying to get in that door and finally you're there. Like, all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think actors also don't always know how much problem solving is actually available to them, which we can talk about later. But so that was early 2018. They hired a woman named Alicia Rodas, who had a stunt background in TV and also had been an intimacy director, which is what we are called in the theater world. And the theater world has had intimacy directors for 10, 15, maybe even 20 years that were mostly kind of like self-starter people who kind of, it seemed like it was kind of like in the zeitgeist, and a bunch of different people were starting to do this kind of at the same time, independently of each other in the theater, because there was so much involved in the choreography in TV versus theater is very different. In theater, you have to hit your mark, you have to hit your lighting, you have to do it the same way every single day in front of hundreds of people. But in TV, there's a lot less sort of choreography going on. But so it had been, this position had a presence in theater for many years. So Alicia had been doing that, and she had a stunt background in TV. So she started doing it on The Deuce, and then very quickly HBO mandated intimacy coordinators on every show. I moved back to Los Angeles from New York. I grew up here. I moved back from New York in March of 2018. I had been writing and directing theater in New York, very small time, and moved back here thinking I'm going to write for television. So I started this writing group with a friend, and she said, I have this idea for a romantic comedy. Would you be willing to write this with me? My idea is to write a movie about a woman whose job is to choreograph sex scenes, and she has intimacy problems in her personal life. I was sold immediately. That sounded really fun. But I also thought, is this a real job? And how have I never really thought about this? And we both were like, this must be real. Someone's doing this, right? And but we couldn't really find a whole lot of evidence of it.
And that, just to say, that's not that long ago.
No, it was a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So almost immediately after we started writing this movie, these articles started coming out about this new job called an intimacy coordinator. And we thought this was so bizarre. We thought we had manifested it into reality. And so we were reading about this woman, Alicia. We were reading about how this was this new wave in Hollywood. And so we sort of had to completely restructure our movie and address the fact that this was actually the scope of this job was a lot larger than we had thought. Then I got a job in casting on The Affair, and we hired an intimacy coordinator on that show. And when I heard that, I reached out to her and said, can I interview you for my movie? And she said yes. And then I interviewed her, and at the end, my friend left, and I said, I'll write this movie, but also, how do I do your job? What can I do? I'll pick up your dry cleaning. I'll be your intern. Just tell me what to do. And she said, this was in December of 2018, so this was almost exactly a month ago. She said, I'm the only intimacy coordinator in Los Angeles right now. I need to train people so that I can confidently refer people, intimacy coordinators, because I cannot take, she was getting 2 or 3 calls a week that she had to pass on, and she couldn't refer anybody to them. So she started training me in January, and then someone from New York, someone from Chicago, maybe 1 or 2 other people who had already been doing this moved to Los Angeles, and then there was me and the 2 other people in my little training cohort, and then the woman who trained us. So that's the 7 of us.
That's crazy how fast that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. And riding the wave of the Me Too movement and consciousness and you know what I was thinking also part of this is, and part of why it's happening with such expediency is nudity and sex on screen in television with streaming platforms has changed dramatically. You know, we saw how Game of Thrones went from the beginning to where it is now, but all the stuff, like there were no rules, there was no sense of what that was, just more sex, more nudity. It wasn't just the old paradigm of Showtime doing softcore porn with those people who weren't really actors, or if they were that whatever the kind of actor. But that's like, that happened so fast, and there was no way to meet that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this job is sort of perceived in 2 different ways. Like I told you about being seen as like the sex police, but it also goes the other way where people think now that we have an intimacy coordinator, we can go so much farther.
Wow.
Yeah, and that is
sex it up.
Right.
Mia, yeah.
I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think that, you know, if we're making art, we have to be careful not to make it gratuitous. Like, no, not sex for the sake of more sex. But if we're actually using it to explore character developments and relationships and like who these people are and what their history is, if we're actually going to get into that, which I don't think we've seen so much of in television. Normally the sex scene on a show is, you know, the lighting changes and there's like fog in there, and then all of a sudden you're seeing, oh, these people have sex with each other, and then you like cut to the next scene in the kitchen or whatever. Whereas I think if we want to start using intimacy coordinators to kind of push those boundaries, then let's have conversations about what this person's sex life actually means in a more holistic sense for who they are and how they relate to people and how they express themselves.
Yeah.
So you talked a while ago with us about how your feeling is that if you're there, a director can get take 4, take 1, because you're doing the facilitating of creating vulnerability and helping to create intimacy, creating a time signature within which everyone feels free to solo, and so they're more relaxed.
Yeah.
Describe that a little bit more, and just so we want people to understand the benefit of
how
this.
to help.
Mm-hmm. So because it feels like there's 2 elements. One is the perpetuation of this stuff, like from the power structure, because the bean counters or legal team is trying to save their ass, so they don't whatever, right? That part of it. Then there's the actors and people who have historically not had a voice in our industry are feeling more agency than they have before, perhaps as a result of the Me Too movement also, which is helpful for them. So how do you explain to the power structure that this is better for everyone?
Yeah, more efficient. So, I mean, I've seen it happen, that if I come in and I have the 2 actors in a scene talk about where they're comfortable touching each other beforehand, and they get really specific. I mean, we saw this in class where it's really common that I try to start these conversations, and one actor will say, anywhere is fine. And that's actually incredibly paralyzing for the other person. But then something that was so beautifully brought up in class was that once when I encouraged the actor to further explain in detail where she was comfortable being touched, she felt the feeling of taking care of her scene partner. I loved how clear that was, because I think that then prepares people to jump into these kinds of scenes and explore within these restrictions that actually make them feel more free. The same way that having lines can often be more free than improvisation. You can actually explore within, like, you know where you have to go, and you know what your vocabulary is, and then you can actually string sentences together.
And so you can rehearse and choreograph that with them so that they can get to the work faster, more efficiently, both for the storytelling and for the schedule.
Yes, but they're also then not on the first or second take figuring out how to touch each other,
right,
and where is okay. And then in extreme situations where there's someone who's really pushing somebody else, by the third take that's happening, someone is having a terrible time and they're saying, let's just get through this, and then the performance is being compromised. So being able to have people get really clear about where they are okay being touched and how, like the quality of the touch, can speed it up. And then there's also things that I can offer, such as the quality of touch. When a director says, I want this to be rough, for example, well, that's going to mean something completely different to one actor versus another actor. Do you mean choking? Do you mean pushing? Do you mean squeezing? What does that mean to you? And so there's a way that I can get clarity first and then show the actors how to touch each other in a way that communicates that, and then we can nail it on the first or second take.
How much time does that take?
It takes...
You mean the negotiated conversation?
Right.
It takes under 2 minutes.
Wow. Yeah. That's an important point, right? Because the director may be thinking, oh, so you're sitting there for you're workshopping this thing for 3 weeks.
No, but Risa, you saw it.
Yeah.
And that was actually kind of an extended conversation. But, you can do that while the second team is in there and getting lit.
Yeah.
It's not taking extra time.
Right.
Here's a question that I think is interesting for people like men like me, right? So part of this is, the fog's clearing for us a little bit because 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women have been sexually assaulted, they say. And so statistically, it comes to bear against women more than men.
Right.
So now we're talking about a sex scene, for instance. Let's say I'm the director. I have not had that experience. I'm thinking, what's her problem? Why can't she just blah, blah, blah? Like that sort of narrative. Yeah. But in this discussion, it feels to me like you have to do some educating, and from the side of the folks who don't necessarily get it. On the other hand, women, people of color, LGBTQ+ folks who have borne the brunt of sexual assault, et cetera, more than most, are they having to then also manage the trauma of past experiences in the context of someone not seeing them? Like, it feels like a lot to navigate.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. Because trauma comes up. You've talked about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And trauma in the face of ignorance, too.
Sure. I love that question. I think there's, but I also just want to be careful not to sort of perpetuate this fear of the domineering director, because I actually have yet to meet that person.
Great.
And I've probably worked with almost 24 directors at this point. I've met one director who felt like I was the PC police and apologized to me for cursing a bunch. That's what he thought my job was. And that was actually an instance where there was a near panic attack due to previous trauma in an actor's life that was disclosed to me after the fact. And even though I wasn't aware of it during the scene, I was able to recognize the trauma response and just reach out and offer to hold her hand. And it was the reason the panic attack was coming on had nothing to do with even the sex scene. It was just the way that a camera operator and an assistant director were talking to her in the third person, telling her to move down, but she was lying down on a bed and her head was toward the foot of the bed. So they kept saying, move down. No, the other way. And she didn't know which way was down, because if your head is, what neither way is really down. So they were just talking to her in this way that was really disrespectful and really kind of objectifying. So even though the director didn't really want to work with me, that actually let me kind of be there for her in a more present
And some
way.
of it is to know that just people have an ally.
Yeah.
And someone who sees them. And you're clearly very good at intuiting that with people, and that's an important part of the job, we would think.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, something that is very elusive to teach. I want to make sure to answer your question, though, about what was the question specifically?
I don't know that it was as specific as I wanted it to be.
The trauma, but just to deal with
Trauma's
the
going
fact.
to come up, and also
Yeah.
the ignorance of, I don't get this. I don't know,
Right.
I don't understand your trauma because it's not my experience.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes because of my role, there's a little bit of power for me to just say, hey, I'm going to be looking out for a trauma response. If someone shares something with me, I can say that to a director, and just without disclosing any information, I can say, just so you know, and I have said this, just so you know, if I call if I ask for a break, it's because I'm seeing a trauma response, which I've been asked to look out for. That's the only reason I'm gonna stop anything. And typically they just say, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you gonna argue with that?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be ridiculous.
But I think it's interesting too, though. I just want to say one thing about it, because just to tell our audience that you were in class with us recently, and again, will be to help us through. We'll talk about class and some of the things that come up. But sometimes it is the case of a woman, and we'd love you to talk to that as well. Someone says, yeah, I'm good.
Right.
Like this particular actor said on Saturday, she goes, yeah, I do this stuff all the time. I'm good.
Right.
But the guy was terrified.
Right.
Like, so, and it was a whole other, and yet I watched you work with her and bring her to a place of acknowledging A, vulnerability, and B, the fact that she was actually taking care of him because he was so scared. And then she felt relief because of all of her past history being brought to that and his ignorance or vulnerability.
Yeah, so something that happens, and I don't at all mean to project this onto her, but I just, very generally speaking, a lot of times that thing of like, I'm fine and anywhere is fine is a way that we don't state our boundaries. And sometimes it's because we don't know our own boundaries, but also sometimes it's from trauma. Our boundaries get really muddied when people have violated them. And once they've been pushed, the line of where they are can also get pushed. There's a lot of evidence that people who have been sexually assaulted once get sexually assaulted again. So many people who have been raped get raped again. So it's a hard fact to come to terms with, but that's, when it comes to sexual assault, you're more vulnerable to it once it has already happened to you. And the reason for that is that most sexual assault, I believe, is with somebody that you know. It's not from a stranger. And so that trust gets disrupted, and you have to come to terms with a betrayal. You have a lot of trouble trusting new people or even seeing red flags. People also end up, sort of self-medicating with really self-destructive behaviors, substances and things like that, and people who are not necessarily really good for you or grounding. And so you can put yourself in situations that are riskier than you were putting yourself in before a trauma occurred. So I think a lot of times the feeling of like you can do whatever to me can come from having your boundaries crossed at a previous moment.
And you can see that, and so you try to get more specific.
Yeah. I don't think that that's always or even usually what's going on, but I think that that's just an important point, that we don't always think about the recurrence of these traumas. But when then I turned to the group and I said, what did the difference feel like to you when you watched her say anywhere is fine versus when you watched her explain very clearly? And there was someone in the group who said, when you said anywhere is fine, I was scared for you. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Yeah. So that, I think, just perfectly kind of explains why getting and I know that most people are saying anywhere is fine because they're trying to be a good sport. They're just trying to be flexible, but it's actually not helpful, And the same way that, like, in an improv scene, to an audience, it looks like this is completely unstructured and completely random, and these people are frightening geniuses who pull these stories out of thin air. But really, when you take an improv class, you start with these really little baby steps. You get comfortable with the rules, you build trust, and then improv is pretty systematic, and you also learn to trust yourself because you're working within a framework. And I think the same thing happens with these scenes. People say, like, is it having an intimacy coordinator or choreographing it or rehearsing it gonna take the spontaneity out of it? And I think it's the complete opposite.
Sure. And I think that, that's true of every aspect of the business and art. That
And
you need
creativity.
structure to create fluidity.
Yeah.
Right. If you say, like, write 3 pages, I am going to be completely paralyzed. If you give me a prompt
Right.
and you say, write 3 pages on this topic or on this experience, I'm going to have a way easier time starting.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, like, you make the parallel between a fight choreographer, a stunt choreographer, right? Which is historically a macho sort of thing, so everyone gets it, right? And we want to make sure actors don't get hurt.
And you can see it. You can see fight choreography very, very clearly.
Right, that's right. And yet it's the same principle, right? Let's create some boundaries so that people aren't injured. Like, it's the same process.
There's loads of research at this point that shows that your brain can't distinguish between physical and emotional pain. Your brain experiences it the same way. And often, because there are no visible scars from emotional trauma, we don't tend to those injuries. We can't see when we've recovered from them, and we often don't at all. We often just don't even address them. But that's exactly why, like, when a stunt coordinator, if you see a bruise or you see a broken bone or you feel a sprain or something.
Or somebody knows, it says, hey, my knee is sensitive because I have surgery.
Right. It's really easy to protect that person. It's also really easy to, sue somebody for screwing it up.
Yeah.
But with emotional trauma, it's completely invisible. And I think that sort of goes back to the reason why my role is sometimes, like, people don't get it, or they think that I'm just standing around doing nothing. Yeah.
And when you talk about, an actor understanding what their boundaries are and what they can ask for and learning that, talk a little bit about an actor's self-advocacy. Because most actors, and our audience is a lot of actors, don't really understand what they're allowed to do, and we can talk a little bit about negotiating that ahead of time, what happens when you get there, when the rules change, when all of that.
And this is in the context of, like, an actor getting an audition at a certain time, and there's something really important in their life, and they will say, I can't do that really important life thing because I wouldn't dare ask my agent to move that, because what if they think that I'm not all in?
Right.
Then they show up on set, to a certain extent, the belly of the beast, where they feel like they have to do good. They have to be amazing here.
Yeah, I mean, that just makes me think of, like, the sort of the way that our industry really doesn't give people a choice in whether or not to be desperate when it comes to work. There's a sort of self-flagellation that's involved with that. There's, like, a self-deprivation that gets people to feel like, well, I gave up, self-sacrificing. And then this idea of, like, who deserves the job more, who gave up more. I mean, that, I don't know how to address that or fix that, but once you have the job, or even in casting when you're negotiating what you're willing to do, I think that there is a huge misunderstanding about how much, like, will you do nudity is not a yes or no question. You can say, I will do nudity from the side. I will do implied nudity. I will do nudity excluding nipple. I will, 3/4 angle is great, but not flat on my butt crack. Like, a lot of people don't want their butt crack to be on television. I've learned that's a pretty common one. But they're fine from the side, or they're fine even, like, above a certain area, like butt cleavage is a word that I learned.
Right, yeah.
A term. But one thing that actors can do, and I encourage them to do, is to call your agent or manager and say, I will do simulated sex and or nudity with an intimacy coordinator. And you can start to negotiate intimacy coordinators into your contracts. That way, when you get hired, they know they have to budget for an intimacy coordinator. They also will slowly start to learn that this is a thing that just needs to be standard or offered, but that also you can negotiate once you've gotten the job. Actually, you can say, like, I've met actors who will do simulated sex and they'll do nudity, but not at the same time. Like, that's one that never would have occurred to me before I started.
But if you agree, because we've talked about this, and if you agree to do something, you say, yeah, I'll do this. I will. It's all very specifically negotiated or discussed, and you're not a big fancy actor on the show, and you say, I agree to this, but then you get there, and you change your mind.
Right.
And then it holds up production because they all said, but you signed this thing or you agreed to this. What is that about, and what are the conditions under which people can change their mind and do, and how does that impact things?
Yeah, so legally, consent can be withdrawn. It has to be reversible. It has to be freely given and reversible. So an actor can change their mind, but that's also going to affect their reputation, and the production also has the right to replace them. So, but what I think is, or what I'm hopeful will sort of change, is that actors won't. I have to imagine that in the case of an actor getting a job, taking a job, knowing what they're getting themselves into, and then they get to set and they change their mind, I don't think that people do that flippantly. I have to imagine that maybe there was someone on set who creeped them out or started hitting on them or touched them in, not sexually, but in a way that made them uncomfortable.
Or they were talked to a certain way, like you managed, or the set wasn't cleared, or any of that stuff.
But maybe their agent pressured them into it too.
Or maybe
like there's pressure from the outside also.
Yeah. Or like the example that I gave in class was that, you may not have known that. You may have agreed to be naked on screen, but you didn't realize you were going to be getting body makeup applied by a male and a female makeup artist in a trailer full of other people. So what I then did for an actress in that circumstance was I said, we will get you a flag, so you'll have your own private section of the trailer. And so I think having an intimacy coordinator on set advocating for actors in that way can help prevent that, actually.
Right, yeah.
And get to the core of it. Like, I think by the time it gets back to you, it's probably like
you as a casting director. It's probably like it's probably pretty out of context, and you're not getting the full story.
Well, I mean, I had an incident where somebody agreed to do upper frontal nudity. It was all very clearly organized and clear. And she was there as a day player, a one-day guest, and she got to the set and she got scared. She just got scared.
Yeah.
And there was nobody there to advocate for her, but nobody was doing anything to her. She just arrived.
Right.
And then when she was handed her contract and the sign, because I got stuff signed ahead of time, I learned, this was on Masters of Sex, and I wish you had been there all those years, because I would have made my job a lot easier and a lot of other people's, even though that was a wonderful show in terms of people taking care of each other, and it came from the top in terms of the showrunners and also the stars of the show. But there was a lot of sex, and there was a lot of simulated sex and a lot of nudity, and that was, part of the point of it. But then someone shows up and she says, I'm scared, I'm not going to do this, and she just shuts down.
Right.
And the part was insignificant, in some ways, and I got the call, she won't do this, talk her into it, or get us another actor. She's supposed to be shooting in 2 hours. And so I tried to renegotiate with her, but she wouldn't have it. Mm-hmm. And she just got scared, and there was no. Now, you might have been able to have changed that, or you might have had to have said, you know what, this is what it is. She's changing her mind. It pissed me off because I had to stop my day, find another actor, get them to the set. Her people demanded she get paid. And on and on. And so,
but I wonder whether, as a culture change, which is hopefully what you're advocating for, that actor, it can start from that actor asking these questions, which are so important that I would never think to have asked, over various things beyond just sex and sexuality. Sure. When I was pursuing an acting career, like, what am I comfortable with?
Right.
Like, largely you shut your mouth and you go where you're told to go, because if you don't, then it won't work in this industry.
She didn't have any self-advocacy because she didn't know that she could.
So that question then is, without an intimacy coordinator, like, let's say as you're a co-star on this show and you're treated as such because you're feeling the hierarchy coming at you, you're not really being considered as much as the other actors. What sort of advocacy do you have, knowing that actor's probably going to feel like they can't rock the boat too much, or they'll be replaced?
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder if, in a very basic way, if she knew that the set would be closed, for example. Like, a lot of actors don't know that.
Or even know what a closed set is.
Or know what it is.
And there are some definitions.
There's different closed sets.
Right.
And then there's a closed set where it's closed, but then everybody's watching on monitors in other rooms.
Right.
Like, is that really closed?
Right.
And does closed mean nobody there except absolutely essential personnel? Who are the essential personnel?
Right. And how are they engaging with you? How are they? I mean, I just watched a cameraman yesterday say to a day player, lean forward, no, less, more, less. Okay, that's what you're gonna do. And who the hell was he to say that to an actor, let alone in that tone?
Right.
And this was not, I wasn't even involved in this part of the scene.
Right.
So I was kind of witnessing this thinking like, where does my job end? And where can I, and he and I are kind of friendly. So I was kind of thinking like maybe next time I sit down with him at lunch, I would just see how I could sort of broach this subject, but it's certainly outside of the purview of my job.
Yeah. As an actor, I remember, and I only remember it now, and I shirked my responsibility, or was ignorant of my responsibility to advocate for these women. But there's maybe 2 or 3 instances when I pursued an acting career where there was a woman who was on set who was either going to be partially nude or in lingerie or something. And I remember clearly the walk in with the robe onto set. And in my head, I'm sort of seeing it differently of like, realizing how much armor was required to do that in front of the entire crew, all either looking or pretending to not look, but looking.
And mostly men.
And mostly men. Like, I mean, 90% or more men.
Yeah.
And what that must be like. And how can we create a situation where that's easier for those actors? And why the hell wouldn't we? Because it's better for everybody, better for the work.
And it gets a better performance. I mean, I don't want to gloss over your question about what actors can do to advocate for themselves. So I think the main thing that I would suggest, and again, this is a little bit elusive, I would say find a buddy, whether it's one of the ADs, just someone that you kind of connect with. And that's, again, going to be checking in with your gut and your intuition. Who is making eye contact with you? Who seems to have a demeanor and a warmth on this set? It might be the costumer who has your robe. It might be the person who's doing your hair. It's going to be somebody. And just kind of identify that person as your, like, comfort rock pillar. And if there's no intimacy coordinator, that is. But okay, so I had an instance on our show last week where we were doing a scene in a brothel, and so there was a bunch of background actors who were doing nudity, low on the totem pole, and I hate saying that, but that's how it's structured. That's the hierarchy. But my job was to be there for them. So there was an AD who was known for his cold and brusque communication style. And I got a text message from this actress saying, I'm feeling very kind of kicked around and not really heard, and I'm not feeling super comfortable. You've been great, but this and this and this.
Where were you at the time?
I was on set.
Okay.
So I found her, and I just was able to say, like, this is not you. She said, hey, it's me, the troublemaker from yesterday. Just feeling really awful about her position. And I said, you're not a troublemaker. I'm very sorry that you were spoken to that way, and you're not the only one, and this had nothing to do with you. So I don't want you to feel like this was, that you were singled out for this. And then I think she felt more comfortable to do what she had to do because really, more than anything that I said, I think it was that a connection was established. I think that was really the
and she could express
point.
herself.
And she could express, and I
yeah.
listened to her. I mean, I don't think that it takes a whole lot more than that, but I also kind of looked around this set and I loved this crew. Everyone on this crew and in the cast was phenomenal, like from the top down. But I really don't know who else could have done that. Just, and I'm not tooting my horn.
No. Why couldn't anyone have done that?
Because there just wasn't another person who was going to open that space for somebody with warmth and with the intention of making them comfortable.
And also, they're busy.
They're busy.
And also, everybody's got a job to do,
Yeah.
and it's the last thing they're going to think about because there's not an awareness. So how can an actor advocate for themselves and say, I'm not a troublemaker. I just want to be comfortable, and I want to be, to be able to do my best work for you, to be able to say that, so that I am available to the work. This is what I need for my comfort level, and to know that they can do that, and it's to be able to say, I can work more efficiently. I can be more present. I can do stronger, better, more emotionally grounded work if I'm in a situation here, rather than where I'm comfortable and where I'm taken care of, rather than feeling like I'm a troublemaker or the squeaky wheel or the difficult person.
And once again, here, so go ahead, please.
Or being like shepherded around like cattle in the instance of a background group.
Right.
And again, to that point, I was going to say the same thing, that like here you are again, kind of transcending the existing power structures in the scheme of things, in the interest of getting this shot so you can make your TV show.
Yeah.
The background performers are not as essential, so says the conventional wisdom, to that. So like the focus is on the lead actors and then the guests and then the blah, blah, blah. And we're filling in the background with the background performers. So their emotional needs won't be considered perhaps at all.
Yeah, right.
I mean, yeah, they're all their comfort level, and I've seen that happen. And certainly, it's not that people are behaving badly; it's that they just are not aware of it. So, I've had so many instances on Masters of Sex, for example, where it hadn't been thought through, and suddenly, but there's people humping in the background naked, and they wanted plump bodies, and so we've got two people, and that they didn't know. They agreed to do this. I had them meet each other ahead of time. They even went out for coffee so they could say, we're going to be doing this together, which I just orchestrated because I knew that was going to be challenging, and I knew both of them. But when they got there, they didn't realize they were going to be far in the background doing it for humor's sake.
Right.
And nobody had, and when I, and I got the call, like they're both really uncomfortable. And when I got to the AD, who I knew well, who was lovely, he said, truthfully, we didn't really orchestrate this shot until just now. We didn't know that was going to be the case. And I said, please, somebody do something. Help them understand why they're vital to this shot.
Yeah.
And they did. And they took care of them. But it needed you to be there. And they didn't know how to speak up for themselves. And they were so scared. They literally physically clung to each other because they were so scared and humiliated by what they were. They said we were furniture in the far background.
Right. I think that. So maybe you don't take that role. Like maybe if those actors thought we're going to be featured, we're going to be prominent on the show.
The script said the script described it very differently than what ultimately happened, and it was nobody's fault. It just was a communication issue, and then when it does happen, who's going to be sensitive to say, okay, well, this is what it's becoming now, right. So we should just notice. We have 700 things to do to get the shot in a short period of time. What about those two naked people?
Right.
Yeah, like they thought that they were sort of agreeing to something that was a little more worth it in their mind.
Yeah.
And then when you find out that that's the entirety of your role, you think maybe I shouldn't have done
And the answer to me was, can you pay them a little more money?
Yeah.
That was suggested by one of their managers. And I said, maybe, but is that really going to answer the issue for them? On the other hand, like I said, I've gotten frustrated with actors who would come into a casting session and I would say, are you comfortable with this? This is what the role requires. I need to know before you even audition or right after the read, so they're not thinking about that. Mm-hmm. Yes. Then, they're like, so we're sending you to your stuff to the producers. You're among a very small group of people. Yes. And then we're offering you the part. It's like, no, I'm not doing that.
And that's something deeper with actors about like just say yes until you get the offer and then you can decide. And again, some of this is not taking that time to ask yourself the question and then answer, what am I comfortable with? What am I not?
Right.
What do you think the future of all this is? Where are we in 15 years with intimacy coordinators?
Or even 3 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, hopefully we're required on every closed set. Hopefully people, I would like to see us kind of integrated further into crews. I think right now it's a little bit weird because our job is to come in and make people comfortable, but often we're brought in like on the day when you're gonna, and I'm meeting you today and I'm gonna be watching you have sex on camera.
Right.
And I also see no two intimacy coordinators are alike. So, the same way that you have stunt coordinators who have a specialty in fire or cars or sword play, you're gonna have intimacy coordinators who specialize in BDSM and kink, and intimacy coordinators who specialize in LGBT plus issues, and
race and gender also.
Race and gender,
Sure.
and sexuality spectrum, gender spectrum, or people who work with minors when it comes to not simulated sex or nudity, but kind of content around this kind of thing. Like, we're each going to have our own specialties, and I would like to see, because right now I think the way that it's working is people are like, we need an intimacy coordinator, period. They just need somebody. And then what happens is they don't really get the right fit, and then they think this whole profession is nonsense or arbitrary or something like that.
Or didn't work for us,
Or it
and
didn't
so
work
it doesn't
for us,
work,
and
period,
it doesn't
at the
work.
end. Yeah.
Exactly.
And there's only 7.
And there's very few of us. Yeah.
But you said something about SAG also being in SAG. What is
we're
that?
working on getting into SAG. That really should be happening soon.
What does that mean?
Well, meaning that we would be part of the union, meaning that we would then have a little bit more kind of pull when it comes to these kinds. I don't really understand how that works. A few other intimacy coordinators are working on that. And I just, when they tell me to join, I'll join.
Yeah.
It would mean health insurance, which would be nice. I have health insurance, but it's terrible. So the future of intimacy coordination, I guess I'd like to see. So I'm in touch with some people at UCLA about directing students how to work with intimacy coordinators specifically. I think that kind of education is necessary, and I also think that I would love to see more integration of my job into the show, and more of the stuff like what we did in class. If I could do that stuff with actors on TV sets, or even with entire crews, I think that would be huge. Of course, there's no time really budgeted for that, but I'd love to see that.
There could be. I mean, we all on every job have to go to sensitivity training and and
sexual harassment training.
Yeah,
that as well.
we all have to do that.
Yeah.
So if and sometimes it's very tedious and it goes on for hours.
Right.
People talking at us. So if there could be half an hour of couple exercises like you did with our class, that you're doing with our classes, it would be transformative.
Yeah.
I think, and maybe it'll be so. Who knows?
Yeah.
Can we just talk a little bit about class, because we are seeing that a lot of the work that we advocate for in class is that people be vulnerable,
right,
that they be present, that they be spontaneous in this place of discovery, and things come up that are. That we need to know how to talk about and help actors navigate so that they're free and present, and yet there is consent ahead of time.
Right. Yeah, I think something that comes up a lot with actors is the idea that after the fact, after you've touched someone or grabbed someone or whatever you say, or kissed someone, you say, well, I was just really in the moment, I was acting. When I hear stories like that, that makes me think that there's a person who really doesn't know themselves very well. And so that person was not able to kind of know ahead of time what might even possibly be their impulses, given the content of a scene. Or, in a really negative way, someone who kind of wanted to do that. Wanted to shock an actor, wanted to kiss an actor, a scene partner, and, kind of manipulated their way into doing so. Without criminalizing anybody, I think that's something that does happen. And also in class, the idea of, asking someone to do a scene with you because you like them and because you think it's a way to get one-on-one time with them, which I know happens a lot, from my own experience. So I would say, first off, don't do that, I think.
But again, the conversations have to happen.
Yes, the conversations have to happen. But it's tricky because I think a lot of us are attracted to talent, right? So when we think someone is very talented, we want to work with them. But we also might kind of have a crush on them or be attracted to them or drawn to them in some way. So I don't think that in and of itself is something to. I don't think that's a bad thing. I just would say, you need to go through a scene and look at if there's a moment when you think you might want to kiss somebody or touch somebody's arm or caress their face or something like that. You are an actor, and I do think that the responsibility falls on you to at least guess at what you might want to do, so that you're not in the moment pushing somebody past their own boundaries. Spontaneity is great, but you can also create a container in which spontaneity is consensually agreed upon.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Better for the work, too.
What?
It's better for the work, too.
It's better for the work. I mean, if you're supposed to have an intimate scene with somebody and you haven't decided that you're going to kiss each other and then you kiss the person, that is no longer an intimate scene. It's going to compromise the performance because those two characters would not have been shocked by a kiss, but the actor will be shocked by a kiss. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of my training talks about creating this container. So you can say to an actor, you can go through a script line by line and you can say, how would you feel about a kiss? At some point in here, I could see that. I could see myself having that impulse. But I would also say you don't need to ever kiss in a rehearsal. We talked about this in class. You don't ever need to kiss in a rehearsal, full stop. The first time you kiss in a TV shoot is once we're rolling. And I think even when you're performing in a class, if you kind of gauge the room and you can sense that your scene partner is nervous about this kiss, and you say, do you want to just see what it feels like and get it over with so that it's not the first time, I'm all for that, but you absolutely do not have to do that before you roll or say action or whatever.
So much of it, I feel like, comes down to listening, like
yes, and full body listening. That is something that I'm a huge proponent of. Not just listening to the words that somebody says, but listening to how they're saying it, how they're looking at you when they say it. Are they having trouble making eye contact when they say it? What is their body language when they say it? Like, when I practiced in front of the class sharing that someone had crossed my boundary, we practiced saying that to your scene partner. I shrank. I shriveled into a little shrimp, and I was called out on it by a student. She said, the way that you said that sounded very apologetic. And that was her seeing something that I'm working on, not apologizing for my boundaries, for my needs, for being uncomfortable. I need to work on not apologizing for making the other person uncomfortable because they've made me uncomfortable.
Could I just say that I loved so much that you were working on your own stuff as a teacher. I thought that was so vulnerable and so brilliant, and I think you got a lot of people responded to you because you were able to recognize your own process, and that's huge. And I think that that's a real gift to be able to give. We have to remember that we're not like magicians here. We don't know everything. We're all figuring this out together.
Yeah, and I'm not I haven't like done 100% of the work. I don't expect to ever be able to achieve 100% and then like get past that point and feel like I've got this under control.
But to see you in process and to see you aware of your process was very much a lesson.
Yeah, it actually made me very emotional, and even talking about it right now is like getting me a little flustered because it is something that comes up for me a lot, and I'm learning to recognize the ways that I do apologize for myself with my body language, without the word sorry, but by saying I just need this, or could I maybe, phrasing things as a question is often an apology. I've caught myself, like I have a ton of dietary restrictions, so every time I talk to a server, I have to come at it from a place of establishing trust with a stranger. That's something I have to do every single day of my life, and it's not just emotional trust. I mean, it's like my life and my health, and will I feel okay today? And I've caught myself, I always I fiddle with my earrings, with my jewelry, with my hair, like while I'm saying to them, I can't eat these things, and could you help me, and da-da-da. And I'm trying to work on not scrunching my shoulder, just stating like these are my needs, and it's not It's because I think it's also very unattractive. Like it's easier to want to help somebody when they're confident in what they need. It's really hard to want to meet someone where they're at when they themselves are kind of unsure and apologetic of what it is that they need.
You said this thing the other day, and I want to just say it back to you because I wanted to say more about this. You said being confident is an ethical mandate.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something that's been on my mind for a couple years now. I think it's something that became clear to me because what I was finding was that when I got insecure in a conversation, my inner monologue became totally self-absorbed. So if I said something that I thought was stupid, for example, I would stop listening to what the other person was saying, and I would get totally in my head about, I said this dumb thing, and how do I make it up? How do I fix it? And I have to prove to them that I'm actually smart and all these things. And then I would come back to the conversation and realize that I was completely ignoring the other person. I was completely not listening to them. I wasn't present. I wasn't even really being honest. I couldn't honestly react to what they were saying anymore because I was getting so self-absorbed. And so I trained myself to, when I start to have that kind of insecure spiral, just say, in order to be a good person right now, I actually have to muster up this confidence because that's what's going to keep me grounded in this moment and present and available to this other person. And I also have noticed that when we get insecure, that's when we start to feel feelings like jealousy, resentment, blame. We judge other people. We even pity other people. That's a form of judgment. We start comparing ourselves to other people. Like, those all are really terrible feelings, and they make us really vicious to other people, and they come out of insecurity. So whenever I'm starting to spiral into this insecure place, I just try to remind myself that in order to be the person that I want to be ethically and morally and for other people in my life, I actually have to be confident, and I don't really have a choice in the matter.
Wow. I think one of the really important things in all this, apropos this discussion of you also being in process, is that this is super messy, and there isn't, how do you deal with intimacy in a sex scene on set? You do X, Y, and Z. Like, it's, and we find this at the studio, right? Like,
in class,
we've done the work of trying to see through our own fog of privilege and whatever else and create more and more space for different and unique folks to express their vulnerability, it creates these beautiful train wrecks of, well, actually then that thing that we've been doing in acting classes for 40 years in America doesn't work for me anymore. Yeah. And then the whole studio has to adjust,
or the thing
which is great.
That's exciting in a moment when somebody loses their shit is actually not okay because it's dangerous or invasive or putting someone into a trauma response, and I'm getting all, this is exciting because I like that kind of work. Right. I have to be mindful of how to manage that.
So I think what we've learned then is to not necessarily say, okay, this is what you did right or wrong, this is the right answer, wrong answer. But someone that said this to us a while ago, it's not the thing that happens, it's how you recover and how you grow and create more space. So I think just living some of these questions and the messiness of this, I think, is important because it creates more space.
Yeah, I think, are you guys aware of the sort of philosophical idea of the difference between freedom from and freedom to?
Go ahead, please.
So freedom to is freedom to, express myself, freedom to, I don't know, live a healthy life, freedom to have love and all these things. Freedom from is freedom from oppression, freedom from fear, freedom from danger, things like that. And sometimes those things are in conflict. Like, if I want to be free to express myself, but my freedom to express myself hinders your ability to be free from oppression and hate and vitriol with free speech, for example, I can't call you a bunch of expletives and slurs about your identity because that doesn't leave you free from oppression. and it is traumatizing to you, free from trauma. So that's when I then have to kind of mediate my freedom to free speech, so that we can both be free. And neither one of us ends up feeling oppressed. So I think like that's kind of where we are at right now, is we're kind of changing that a little bit. When we talk about, like, directors forever have been free to get the performance that they need, period. Actors have not been free from trauma and free from danger and free from risk. And now the power is shifting to more of a balance. I wouldn't say that the actors are now in control,
right,
but I'd say that directors are no longer free to do whatever they want. They now have to contend with actors' freedom from all these horrible things that have been happening.
And somehow, hopefully, we meet in the middle and find a creative way to tell the story.
Yeah, and I think we're doing that. I mean, I had one director recently say, "This is the shot that I need." And I sort of thought, don't you want to be a little more creative than that? You know, like, you really need this one shot to feel like you're getting the story that you want to tell? I don't really buy that.
Yeah, well.
Did you say that?
No, but, you know, we kind of like worked around it, and we talked about how to get that shot while cutting out a certain movement that would show a part of a body that the actor didn't want to be shown.
Yeah.
So we worked through it.
Yeah.
I feel like this stuff is so exciting. Like,
I do
it's just
too.
Because it just, like, we're opening new doors.
Yeah.
And like, what is it on set now, even creatively, when more people are included in the process and more people feel safe to go deeper? And I mean, that's really exciting.
There's awareness, there's collaboration, and talk about freedom. There's real freedom in that. And it's going to be difficult for some people. So we're talking about some of the obstacles and the difficulty in it. But as you said, you can tell deeper, bigger stories that include intimacy, sexuality, and even some challenge of aggression in that, in safe and aware ways, and that's extraordinary and necessary.
Yeah, and you asked me about the future of intimacy coordination. I would love to see intimacy coordinators brought in even earlier, like into writers' rooms.
Baby.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about, because then I can say, hey, you know, okay, if you want to do that, let's get really specific about it. Because so often in the script, what it says is, and then they fuck.
Yeah.
And then it's my job to be like, what position? You know, just the basics.
Yeah.
What position? How do you want to shoot this? But also, like, what are they dealing with today? You know, like, and I see it because I come from a writing background. Like, that's just a missed opportunity to get specific. I mean, you're giving these people actual words to say, and then when it comes to the sex scene, you're like, and then they do it. So if I could be involved in whether the plot has actually something significant about it that's sexual, like a kink or BDSM or something like that, I would love to be brought in to talk about stuff like that with the writers, to also just talk about, like, the power dynamics there and what we're actually saying, or what we're saying as far as, like, if something is in vogue right now or whatever, or like, hey, I actually just heard about this toy, you know, I mean, whatever, my brain goes wild that with those possibilities, but also to be able to get clarity from that point on, and to be able to say, you know, if this is what you want to do, here's how I see this playing out. Because I can become that kind of psychic person who's like, here are the issues that I see with that. And then being able to talk to casting and to be able to say, like, I'm familiar with our crew, I'm familiar with our producers, and I'm familiar with these directors, and I'm also familiar with the series regular that this person is going to be with. And then I could say to casting, you know, here's what I think you need to be asking these people in the room, so that you're getting really, really specific about it.
And also get specific about what the action is, not just, you just have them, you know, simulate masturbation, and let's see how what their faces look like.
Right.
And,
oh my God.
Yeah.
There's
like
so much left out of that.
So much left out of that. Yeah.
And also, I mean, like, a question like that, I'm like, okay, well, do they want to shoot it on their face, or do they want to shoot it on their crotch? Like, that's going to be a different thing for an actor.
Most of the time they just haven't thought about it.
Right.
Writers will say, we'll wait for the director. We haven't really dealt with that. We know what we want, but we're just not there yet. A lot of things happen,
Sure, but then you could also say that to an actor,
Right.
and you could say, and then if the actor has a preference or one is not okay and one is okay, then you could then go back to the writers and say, so here's their, they're fine with it, this, or, the producers or whoever it is that you're talking to at this point in the process, and you could say, so this actor is amazing, they just want to make sure that it stays on their face and not on their crotch.
Right.
And then they can actually make an informed decision.
Right.
But
Well,
again, it forces the writers to give themselves creative permission even to say, but what do we mean by this and why? And
Right.
let's explore this, which
What do
is
we
so
want here?
interesting.
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
why is it that that person's masturbating, and just delve into it in what I believe could be wildly creative ways if they gave themselves permission to do that.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
in the same way they would do with a fight or something else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this has been really,
This was great.
You're
It's
awesome.
amazing.
Like, just
You
keep
are.
doing this shit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
pushing.
yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
I love
And we
it.
love having you here because for us, anything we can do to give actors some tools and so that they can feel that agency on set, like now we start changing culture
Yeah.
at various levels, which is, what we're all hoping for
Yeah,
here. I
one
think.
actor, one sexual act at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Finding and maintaining success as an actor requires intense focus in your acting work. It's a consistent practice.
But in a business this dynamic and this fraught with emotional landmines, achieving your goals also requires addressing specific elements of your career and your life. To be successful, you have to take a long look at what you want your career to look like and what practical daily steps you're taking to get there.
And you have to be taking responsibility for the mental and emotional roadblocks that keep you from success. So to make sure the work gets done, we offer career coaching and life design coaching. It's via Skype and Zoom for actors all over the world.
In our career coaching sessions, you'll find ways to let go of guilt, doubt, fear, regret, and powerlessness. Embrace your gifts and come up with strategies to realize your projects, to network effectively, to engage with your representatives successfully, and to make money doing what you love. Together, we will turn the energy of frustration into the energy of doing and creating.
In life design coaching sessions, you'll come to a deeper awareness of the emotional and mental blocks that stand in your way. You'll change your relationship with those blocks, and then we'll tailor a doable, daily practice that creates positive change in your life. It's awareness to intention to action. It's about removing what's in your way and creating presence and power in your life so you can show up for yourself and your career.
So to schedule a career coaching or life design coaching session or a series of coaching sessions, go to BraymanGarciaBraun.com/coaching or click the link in our podcast show notes.
And if you use the promo code PODCAST, you get a 10% discount on your first session.
We love sharing this content with our community. We offer it 100% free, and it's our privilege to do so. If you're loving this podcast and are interested in offering something in return, go ahead and subscribe to the Acting Podcast. Then find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen to your podcast and leave us an honest rating and review. Your words will help us bring this work to even more actors and artists around the world.
Thank you so much for listening and for being here with us. We love how this community shows up for us and for each other, online and in the studio. Come visit us online at thebgbstudio.com. Jump into a class with us. We're here to get you into the kind of shape necessary to be successful.